She thought she could get away with it, but this royal guard had other plans. Madison Harper stepped confidently out of the black limousine, the cold London air hitting her as she adjusted her oversized, puffy jacket. Clutching a coffee cup in one hand, she scanned her surroundings with a look of utter boredom. The drizzle in the air did nothing to dampen her spirit. She was used to being the center of attention, and today would be no different. She was in London, after all, and she had a reputation to uphold. Behind her, her entourage tumbled out of the limo, all carbon copies of privilege, their laughter and chatter echoing in the square. Buckingham Palace stood majestically in the distance, its iconic gates gleaming under the gray sky. But to Madison, it was just another backdrop for her personal performance. The palace, with its grand architecture and centuries of history, was nothing but a stage for her to shine in front of her millions of followers. She wasn't here for tradition. She wasn't here for culture. Madison was here to be seen, and more importantly, to be admired. She didn't even notice the royal guard standing motionless in their red tunics, towering bearskin hats, and polished black boots. They were just part of the scenery, like props on a set. To her, they might as well have been mannequins. She scanned the square, rolling her eyes dramatically as she mentally prepared for her next move. Seriously, this place is so dull, one of her friends whined, rolling her eyes in a way that mirrored Madison's attitude. Where's the glamour? Where are the good places for selfies? Madison didn't answer. She was already too busy sizing up the guard. His flawless posture, his complete stillness, it all irritated her. How could anyone stand there without even acknowledging her? The nerve. She had money, fame, and an aura that made people stop and stare wherever she went. The guard, however, seemed completely immune to her presence. That's when it hit her, the perfect way to make this boring day a little more exciting. With a smirk on her face, she turned to her friends. "Watch this," she said, already knowing what she was going to do. Little did she know, her impulsive act would set everything in motion, and this trip to Buckingham Palace would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Madison wasn't going to let the royal guard stand there without acknowledging her. She had already decided he would be her audience, the perfect subject for her impromptu performance. She strutted closer, her oversized jacket billowing as she walked. Her friends followed behind, giggling and whispering, knowing exactly what was about to unfold. Madison was the queen of attention, and no one, not even a lifeless guard, was going to steal her spotlight. She stopped just inches away from the soldier, her heels clicking against the wet cobblestones like a drumbeat. The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed ahead, his expression as stone-cold as his posture. Madison stood there for a moment, letting the silence linger between them. The crowd around them had started to notice, some pulling out their phones, others whispering. Madison smiled smugly, knowing that she was about to give them something worth capturing. "Hey," she called out, her voice sharp and challenging. "Are you even human, or just some overpriced decoration?" Her words cut through the air, but the guard didn't move. Not even a twitch. Madison clicked her tongue in annoyance, staring at him, waiting for some kind of reaction. But there was nothing. He was still as a statue. A few tourists in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something strange was unfolding, but no one stepped in. No one was going to challenge the rich, spoiled girl with her designer purse and matching attitude. Madison was undeterred. She didn't care about the murmurs or the slight unease in the air. In her mind, she was untouchable. This was her moment to shine, and if the guard wasn't going to entertain her, she'd make him. She snapped her fingers right in front of his face, the sound sharp and cutting. Still nothing. Wow, this is so boring, she muttered to herself, rolling her eyes. He won't even blink. Her friends laughed behind her, egging her on. Madison pulled out her phone, facing the camera toward the guard. Yo, guys, check this out. I found a human mannequin, she said, circling around him, recording every angle, mocking him for his lack of reaction. To Madison, this was just another day in her world. But little did she know, she was about to push the guard, and herself, too far. The atmosphere was changing, and Madison didn't feel it yet, but the consequences of her reckless behavior were coming fast. Madison's frustration was building. She had snapped her fingers in front of the guard's face, made fun of his stillness, and now, the lack of any reaction was driving her mad. She wasn't used to being ignored, especially not in front of an audience. The crowd was watching, the tourists were recording, and all she could think about was how bored she was. This was supposed to be fun. But this lifeless soldier wasn't giving her the attention she craved. I mean, seriously, Madison muttered under her breath, glancing at her friends. They giggled behind her, egging her on, loving every second of this. Let's see what happens if I freshen him up a little. She pulled out her glittery handbag, a ridiculous accessory that only added to the absurdity of the situation. One quick zip, and she produced a steaming coffee cup, still releasing wisps of warm caramel vanilla aroma. The crowd shifted uneasily, but Madison didn't notice. She was on a roll, feeling unstoppable. Her followers were watching live, and they were eating it up. With a smirk, Madison took a step forward and raised the cup, aiming it right at the royal guard's pristine red tunic. The coffee splashed across his chest in a wide arc, the dark brown liquid quickly soaking into the fabric. Madison stepped back, her grin widening as the stains began to spread, leaving an ugly mark on the otherwise perfect uniform. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The square fell eerily quiet, as if the air itself had thickened, holding its breath. The crowd around them stood frozen, some with their mouths agape, others too shocked to move. Madison didn't realize it, but she had just crossed a line. What she thought was just a funny moment had escalated into something much bigger. The royal guard didn't flinch. Not a muscle twitched. But something shifted in the atmosphere. The crowd watched, now sensing the tension that Madison hadn't picked up on. The soldier remained still, and for a moment, Madison thought she had won. But the silence stretched on, heavier now, as if the entire city was waiting for what would happen next. And then, the guard moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, and the ground beneath Madison's feet seemed to shift. The world around her seemed to slow, the anticipation in the air growing thick. The instant the royal guard moved, Madison felt the ground beneath her shift. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze. The guard, who had been a lifeless statue moments before, was now stepping forward, his polished boots clicking sharply against the cobblestones. Madison instinctively took a step back, but the space between them seemed to close in on her. The crowd was still. No one dared to breathe. She felt the weight of every eye on her, their silent judgment growing heavier with each passing second. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to smile. "What's the matter, Mr. Robot? Are you finally awake?" she said, trying to keep her cool. But the words felt hollow, the bravado slipping from her voice. The guard didn't answer, didn't flinch. His gaze remained unblinking, fixed on her, but it wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was something much worse. It was unshakable. Madison's friends, who had been laughing just moments ago, were now silent, exchanging nervous glances. One of them pulled her phone out, but the giggles had stopped. The energy in the square had shifted from excitement to discomfort, from amusement to something far darker. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were waiting. The royal guard stepped closer, his presence towering over her, imposing and disciplined. There was no aggression in his stance, no sense of threat, but his mere proximity sent a chill down Madison's spine. She swallowed hard, but her throat felt dry, her confident smirk fading as the reality of what she had done began to settle in. The guard's steady gaze held her in place, and she realized she had crossed a line, one that she couldn't take back. "Step back," his voice cut through the silence, calm and unshaken. The command was firm, unwavering. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a threat. But it carried a gravity that Madison had never felt before, a weight that seemed to crush her self-assurance. For the first time in her life, she felt small. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "You can't tell me what to do," she stammered, but the words felt weak even as they left her mouth. The crowd shifted, sensing the growing tension, the unease in the air. Madison's bravado was slipping fast. She took a step back, but the guard didn't budge. She was caught, and the world around her seemed to close in, the consequences of her reckless behavior becoming all too real. The moment the royal guard issued his command, everything shifted. Madison took a hesitant step back, but the world around her seemed to close in. The crowd, which had once been enamored with her antics, now stood frozen, their eyes filled with silent judgment. The weight of their stares pressed against her chest, suffocating her. She tried to breathe, but her lungs felt heavy. For the first time, she wasn't in control. Her friends, who had once laughed along with her, now appeared as if they had seen a ghost. One of them reached out, grabbing Madison's arm, their hands trembling. "Madison, maybe we should go," she whispered, her voice unsteady. But Madison couldn't move. She was paralyzed, caught in a moment she hadn't anticipated. The guard, towering over her, was still unmoving, but the air had changed. It felt thick with tension, like something big was about to happen. The silence between them stretched on, longer than any moment she had ever experienced. Her confident attitude, the one that had gotten her everything she wanted in life, started to crumble. Her once cocky smirk faded, replaced with a feeling she had never known: fear. The royal guard, standing perfectly still, didn't break eye contact. His gaze wasn't angry, but it was unyielding. He wasn't intimidated by her wealth, her fame, or her mockery. He simply stood there, and in that stillness, Madison realized how deeply she had misjudged him, and the entire situation. Her reckless actions had pushed him beyond the limits of what could be tolerated, and now there was no turning back. Before she could think, before she could say another word, 2 more guards appeared from behind the gates, their synchronized steps adding to the overwhelming presence of authority in the square. Madison's heart raced. The reality of what was happening hit her all at once. Her phone was still in her hand, but the live stream had gone silent. No one was laughing now. The crowd parted as the 2 officers stepped forward, their faces unreadable. Madison, desperate for a way out, tried to smile and feign innocence. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice high-pitched with panic. "You can't do this to me." But the officer wasn't listening. "You're under arrest for assaulting a royal guard," he said, his voice calm but firm. Madison's stomach dropped. She tried to resist, but the officers moved swiftly, grabbing her arms. She struggled, but her strength was nothing against theirs. As they took hold of her, the world seemed to close in around her, her high life, her reputation, her entire existence, all slipping away in front of a crowd that had once cheered her on. Now, they stood in silence, recording her humiliation, her downfall in real time. Madison was dragged toward the police car, her heart racing in her chest. Her world, once built on wealth and privilege, had crumbled in a matter of moments. She had been untouchable, until now. The crowd murmured, some mocking her, others quietly stunned, but no one stepped forward to help. She had crossed a line, and now there was no way out. What do you think of Madison's actions? Was she asking for trouble, or did the Royal Guard overreact? Do you believe there should be consequences for disrespecting tradition, or was it just a harmless prank? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How far is too far when it comes to pushing boundaries? Let's discuss. Backhand index pointing down.